Okay, so I'm going to start today by making a little fire basket to sit beside the log burner in the living room, and this is going to be like a little jewel basket for logs and newspapers. So what I've got here, if you imagine that we were making a drawer, so you've got your base, sides, and then your front and back, and then I've also done a little divider which will sit inside, not quite centrally because I'll have more room for the logs, but that will sit in there like that. And for sizing, I've worked this out so it will just sit nicely at the side of the fire and won't overhang the hearth. So you'll need to work out your own measurements, but roughly you'll cut your base, your sides will be the same thickness, and then your front and back will enclose the base and the sides. And obviously you can do it whatever height you like. I'm doing this to a height so that I'll have a little bit of newspaper sticking out the top. And then obviously I can cut my twigs, which will be the logs, to the height so that they're also showing over the top. Now I'm going to be covering this with string to look like a wicker basket. But what I actually want to start by doing is colouring all of these pieces. So I'm going to use a dark wood dye. And I'm not really doing it this time to hide the glue residue marks, but I just want the inside to be coloured so that I can't see any of this natural wood showing through. But I'll do both sides because then when you cover it with the string, which I'll be using for the wicker, you also are not going to see any of the natural wood showing through if there are any gaps between the string. So it doesn't really matter what colour you use for this. You could even use a brown or a black emulsion paint or something like that, but just something dark so you're not going to see sort of inside the basket. And I'm just going to do one coat on all of the pieces. And I haven't even sanded them because they're obviously all going to be covered, so I don't need to create a nice finish or anything. Okay, so I gave each of those pieces a dab on a piece of kitchen towel, which will help them to dry more quickly. So I'll now leave those to dry off completely, and then we can glue it all together. Okay, so the wood dye is now dry, so I'm ready to start gluing the pieces together. I'm going to begin by gluing a side piece to the outer edge of the base. I then want to put that little insert in, and I've got a piece of 6x3 strip here, so 1/4 of an inch wide, that I'm just going to place there and then glue this alongside it. And I always like to use a spacer if I can, rather than making pencil marks, being careful not to knock that first side out of place. But I also don't want to leave the spacer in there for too long, so I obviously don't want to glue it into place. I'm just going to slide that out. Like that. And when you've sort of applied the wood dye first, you do find that the glue will take a little bit longer to grab, so you may just need to leave an extra bit of time between steps. Okay, so I'm then just going to stand that onto the first side and apply glue to this other edge. Lay that back down and attach my remaining side. So I'll just let that dry off for 30 seconds or so, and then I can attach the front and back pieces. Okay, so I'm going to lay that down again and apply glue along those open edges. I'll just stand it up and attach my front piece, making sure that the sides are lining up with the sides of that piece, and that it's all sitting flat against my work surface. Again, I'm going to leave that to dry off for 30 seconds or so. Okay, so again, I'm going to lay that down and apply glue to the final side, and then attach the back piece. And then if you've used a spacer, what you can actually do here is just pop it back in at that side to make sure that the divide is staying where it should. Give it all a good press, and I'm just going to press and hold for a bit, and then I'll be ready to attach the string. Okay, so once the fire basket had completely dried, I sanded it along the top edge there just to make sure that all of my pieces are nice and flush. And I'm now going to add the cord around the outside edges. So the cord I'm using is this natural 0.5 millimeters or half a millimeter, which I think is 1/32 of an inch thick cord. And you don't want to go too thick just to keep the scale correct, but then you also don't want to go too thin because then you'll be wrapping round and round and round forever. Okay, so I'm going to begin by applying glue around the bottom sort of half of the box. Get that covered and then you can put a bit more glue on. And I'm sure you've all seen me use this method before. It's a technique I really like for creating a sort of wicker style piece. Okay, so my long edge will be the back of the box. So I'm going to start there in the centre of the back and at the bottom. And getting these started is always the tricky part, but once you've sort of wrapped round a few times it gets easier. I'm just going to hold that on there with my nail, try not to put my finger in too much of the glue, so that I don't wipe it off, and then wrap around, keeping flush if you can with that bottom edge of the box. I'm pulling fairly tightly so that it sticks to the glue, and then you want to come around and below your first piece, and this is usually what happens. You'll be sort of pulling the pieces off as you go around, so just persevere. Take your time, be patient with it. Not quite ready to throw it on the floor yet. Add a press. And then come around, keeping as close as you can to that first round. And then work your way up. So see, once you sort of start working your way around, it does get easier. And then what you can do once you've been around, I don't know, 5 times or something, is sort of use your nail just to push them all together so that they're as close as they can be. And that will look more natural then. See any gap in, just give it all a push. And if you do start wiping the glue off, just apply a little bit more. And don't worry either about actually getting it on the cord, because it does dry clear, and then when it's dry you can just sort of rub that off with your finger. So once you've covered your glue, you can then take hold of the covered area and apply glue around the top of the box. And then continue your way around. I'm just going to apply a little bit more glue around that top. And then what you want to try to do is end the cord where you started, so at the back of your box or basket or whatever you're making. Push those down to make space around that side. And just snip that off and press it down. Okay, so I now want to make a plait to cover this top edge. So when I'm making a plait to fit around the top of a basket, I usually use the rule of 3 times the circumference of the piece. And that's going to be far more than you'll need, but it's better to have more than get around and you haven't actually done enough. So cut your strands and then knot them together. And then you can either get somebody to hold on to that end for you, or as I'm going to do, just clip that onto the edge of your cutting mat. Nice strong bulldog clip there, and then you're ready to plait. So once you get to the bottom, you can tie that off. And I've left a bit at the end there, but I did just lay my box alongside like that, just to make sure that I had enough, and as you can see it's more than enough there. Okay, so apply glue around the top edges of the box. Now I'm not going to put the plait along the central divide, but what I did do is just add a little bit of wood dye to that piece after I'd sanded it. Okay, so what I'm going to do again is actually start at the back of my box. I'm going to lay that along there. Actually, I've probably gone too far over. I just wanted not to include that first bit of the plait, which is a little bit loose. So I want to start about there. And then once you've actually stuck it down, you can snip off the end. And then work your way around. It's coming open at that end, but that's okay because I can glue that up when I get back round there. Hold on to it as you go around the corners. Make sure you're not pulling it too tightly so that it's overlapping the inside of the box. Okay, so I'm just going to snip off those loose ends. Then apply a little bit more glue. A bit on the ends as well, so I can push those together. And then bring this other end round. Join that on like that, and then snip that off as well. Just going to put a little bit of glue on those loose ends there. Give that all a final press. Okay, so there's my little basket, and I'm now going to add some newspapers and some logs. Okay, so I'm going to start with the newspapers, and I've got some here that I've printed from my 1940s doll's house. So obviously the headlines aren't correct, but what I'm actually going to do is fold those in half and then fold them into quarters, folding in the top and bottom. So you won't actually be able to see what they say on there. And then fold them in like that. And just stand those in there. And I really like these because they've all got the sort of different colours. So you've got the grey, one slightly sort of brown, and then that pinky Daily Express there. I think I can just squeeze one more in there. Might have to just fold it again actually. Put that in there like that. I'm going to sort of ruffle them up a little bit as well. They would have been obviously red before they were put in there. I think that looks quite good. Okay, so for the logs I'm going to use the ones that I cut for the previous basket. Just see what I can actually fit in there. There's quite a few in there. So these were obviously just twigs from the garden, and I just picked some really fine twigs, the thinnest ones that I could find, and then cut those using my mitre block and saw. Let's see. I might actually, just because they're not very tall, just put a little bit of tissue in the bottom there. I'm just folding up a tiny piece of kitchen towel. I'm going to press that into the bottom. And see if I need any more. Yeah, I'll probably just put a little bit more in so I get a little bit more height. Put another tiny little bit in there. And then I'm just going to actually stand these in. That's much better height there. I'm hoping I don't need too many more because it's quite wet out there today and drizzly. Not only will I get wet, but I'll have to then leave them to dry. So these are probably a little bit too fat. There's another thin one there, I'll try and poke that one in. But what I'll do is I'll just keep a couple of those to put actually on the hearth. Okay, so let's go and put this into place. Is in place, and I purposely want it over that side where it's less visible. I think that looks really nice just tucked behind the log burner there, or dual fuel burner I should call it, because I've obviously got some coals in there. And I did actually just try to put that on, but I think the battery must have gone. And thinking about it now, I'm wondering if I did actually switch it off last time, because I haven't used it that much, so that's my fault, but quite annoying all the same. But I really like that. And then I just want to show you another couple of things. So I talked about the armchair that I'd made as a patron project, and I'm going to be remaking, obviously in the correct colours for this room, and that is going to sit there. And I hadn't had any luck so far in finding this checked fabric, so I wanted to redo it in this red and cream check. But I haven't been able to find that. I'm sure I got it from Hodges Haberdashery last time, but they don't have that particular one in stock. But I will keep looking. But I did find this in my box of fabrics, and I've only got this one sort of 20 by 20 inch piece, so I'm not sure it will actually be enough. But I was just going to ask if you think that would suit. So I'm going to sort of lay it on the chair like that, to give you a sort of idea of what that would look like. I actually really like those colours. It's got the red and brown in it. I think it looks quite nice with the paper as well. I would then need to add some of that to the sofa in, by the way of cushions. I think that would probably go. So if I can't get hold of that one, that would be my first choice, then I will probably use something like that. That's that sort of brushed cotton, and that is just cotton, or poly cotton probably. But it's still a really nice fabric, so I quite like that. And then just one other thing I wanted to show you is this glazed door sideboard. And this is actually something I made for book 6, and this will be one of the projects in the living room section. And I actually quite like that for in here, and that will go over on that back wall like that. But I'm going to remake it and make it a lot wider, probably so it comes to about here, and then I'll have another little side table here beside the sofa. I want to keep the sofa there because I like it being central to the actual log burner. And I know for the photos I usually put it the other way round just because it's easier to get everything in when it's over there. But I think having it over there would then block that back wall where I do want to have some sort of a unit. But I actually think for size that looks quite good. So let me just move that piece of fabric. So if you just imagine that that chair is in that check. And I quite like that sort of tucked in nicely beside the chimney breast there. I could even go over a little bit more like that. And then to about there. So it would be quite a wide cabinet. But I think that would look quite nice. A really nice big painting above it. A lamp on there and some other bits and pieces. And then I also want to have a little unit here. Probably again something fairly chunky with doors, and then that would be it for furniture in there. I think that would be all we needed, and then just lots more lovely accessories and paintings and lamps and things to warm it up. But what I want to make now for this room is a little basket which will sit beside the sofa with some extra little blankets and throws in it. And here is my little blanket basket. I didn't go into a full tutorial because I basically used the same method that I used for the fire basket, and I'm sure you've all seen me make these before. But I did a base using 3mm thick 1/8 of an inch balsa wood, and I cut that to 30mm in diameter, or 1 3/16 of an inch. I cut 2 pieces to the same size and gently sanded around the cut edge. I then glued them together and secured them using one of my stronger clamps. I made the height of the basket the same, so 30mm, 1 3/16 of an inch, and I just used card for that. Choose a card with a darker side, so either brown or dark grey or something like that, so that it's not going to show through the cord, and use that on the outside edge. I then lined the inside with this lovely cream linen fabric, and before applying the cord I just added a couple of little handles and then wrapped the cord around in the same way. Again I added the little plait around the top which covers the raw edges, and it's not completely dry yet, which is why you can still see some of the glue on there. And I am just going to pop a few blankets and bits in just to see how that's going to look. Okay, so I've just used some sort of offcuts of fabric there. The colours probably aren't quite right, but I really actually like the crocheted blanket, and that's just 12 squares that I made to go over the back of a chair and then didn't actually use, but I think that works really nicely in there. And then just some squares of fabric at the back which I've taped down at the back for now. But I'd like to make another knitted blanket to go in there, and once I get some sort of checked fabric for the sofa I'll use that. This is a little bit too grey, so probably not quite right for that armchair, but I do quite like that with the tassels on. But let's go and have a look at this in place in the living room. Okay, so that is going to sit there beside the sofa. I think that actually looks quite good, even with those colours. Quite like that. And I just thought it's a really nice little feature to have a little basket of blankets that people can take, put over their knees on the sofa or in the chair. Okay, so one more project that I want to have a go at today, and that's making some candlesticks and candle holders. So I've cut my pieces here, and these are all parts of spindles and newel posts. So if I just show you the little drawers that I've got over here in my unit. So I've got cut spindles and posts there. And in those drawers are just parts that I've made cuts into for other projects. And then I just keep all of the little bits. And quite often these come in handy for other little projects. Even, you know, you might want a little handle or something, or just a little part to add to a furniture project. So whenever you cut into a spindle, even if you trim it, it's always worth keeping the bits that you've got left. So I'm going to be applying wood dye to all of these, but what I want to do first of all is just sand the bottoms so that they're all going to stand straight. So I'm just going to go along the sandpaper like that in one direction. And then what you can also do is just use a finer piece of sandpaper just to tidy those up even more. And if you've got a very sort of square base and you want to round the edges over, then you could do that. You might want to sort of sand around the top edge as well if you've made a cut there. Maybe just sort of bevel it in, just tidy it up a little bit. Okay, so I've secured all of the pieces to a piece of masking tape, and that just makes it easier to apply the wood dye. And again, I'm using my brown mahogany. And I'll probably do a couple of coats of this, just to give them that nice rich colour. Okay, so that's a couple of coats of wood dye on each of those. And whilst they're drying, I just want to show you a couple of projects I've been working on for my Patreon channel. So I think I showed you this rug in one of my other YouTube episodes when I was sort of still working on it. So I just wanted to show you the completed rug. And in the next episode of the 1940s Doll's House, so on the 10th of October, I'll be stretching this and then starching it, because I'm not sure if you can see on camera, but it's not entirely square. So it's always a really good idea to stretch them out and then stiffen it so that it will keep its shape. And that can happen, you know, as you're working on them. If you are sort of pulling at the canvas as you're working, it can tend to stretch them, so you don't always end up with a complete sort of square rug. So I'll be doing that, but I was really pleased with that. So I'll just show you as well how far I am with the 1940s Doll's House. And the rug is for this room, the living room. And in the episode that went out on the 10th, I painted those flying ducks that you can see on the back wall there. And also a couple of the metal miniature clocks. So this room now just needs some more accessories, and I'll also be obviously adding the rug. And I want to make some sort of footstool or little poof to go in there. I've got some lamps, so 3 LED lamps that will sit on this table over on the back sideboard there, and then on this little side table as well. So I've just got to cover those. And then I've already made a start on some of the accessories for that next episode with, I'm not sure if you can see in there, a little filled ashtray for the gentleman of the house, and there's some cigarettes and matches on there as well, and a little ARP Warden booklet. So I'll be adding to his little side table. But yeah, just really pleased with how that room is looking. And then also in the latest episode, I make this hall stand. And again, really pleased with that as well. And in the next episode, I'll be adding some coats and bits and pieces to that. Some walking sticks and umbrellas in the holders at each side. Got the little drip trays in the bottom there. We'll need some gas mask boxes and things like that. Matt is going to paint me another picture to go in here. I just need to sort of tell him roughly what the sort of thing that I'm looking for, and then he'll do that. And then moving up, the sewing room is complete. I really love that view through the door, so that's going across the landing and into the bathroom there, where you can just see the door of the airing cupboard in there. And then the bedroom. Again, still a few accessories and things to add in here, and I'm working on a little crocheted blanket to go on the bed. But really love that room as well. And then coming up on the 20th of September is tutorial number 75, and that will be for this lovely console table. And as soon as you join, you unlock all of the tutorials. So if you were to join as a tier 3 member, you get all of the tutorials, so 75, plus every episode of the 1940s Dollhouse and all of the monthly vlogs as well. But obviously you can join in at any of those lower tiers, and there are loads of videos for you to catch up on. So I hope that's something you're able to consider if you'd like to see more of my content, and I look forward to welcoming you. Okay, so the candle holders and candlesticks are now dry, so I'm going to attach the candles, and I'm going to use a little bit of tacky wax for that. And the candles are actually left over from my little Harbour Homewares shop project. So I made these using polymer clay, and then I added a little bit of sort of ochre coloured charcoal just to give them that sort of natural wax look. And then before I'd actually baked the clay, I made a hole with a sewing needle, and then after they were baked I actually threaded through some cotton to make the little wick, and that's a really good way of doing it. And if you want the wick to look as though it's already been burned, then you just use a black wick. So let's just put a tiny little bit of tacky wax on the bottom of each. And with tacky wax you really do only need a tiny amount. And if you sort of put your piece into place and then you can see any tacky wax around the edge, do just use your cocktail stick to remove it. I find that it can sort of really ruin a really lovely scene if you can see the tacky wax coming out at the bottom of the piece. So always just remove any sort of overspill. Give that a good press into place. And then what I'll do as well is just put a little bit on the bottom of each one to actually stick those to the mantelpiece. I may want to move them, but I think tacky wax will work well with these anyway. So these candles that I've used here are bought ones, and I do actually sell those in my Etsy shop, but as you can see they're quite white and don't really go with the ones that I've used on the candle holders. I'm going to leave them there for now, but I do want to have another polymer clay session and make some more candles, so I'll make a couple of thin candles for the candlesticks there, and I also want to make some sort of triple wick large candles, and I'll have one standing on the hearth in there. I think that will look nice and really suit the room as well. So that will be coming up in a future episode. But what I want to do now is go and put these into place on the mantelpiece. And there are the candles in place. I think they look really good. I definitely think the sort of more yellow coloured candles look better than the bright white. But like I say, that's just temporary. But yeah, pleased with those sort of few bits and pieces that I've added today, and the little blanket basket as well. Few bits to change, as I spoke about earlier. But I think it's coming along really nicely and really getting that sort of cosy log cabin feel to it. So that's going to be it for today, and I'll be back with another episode as soon as I can. So until then, take care. Bye.